Hello everyone, welcome to yet another session of the daily news analysis of SRIRAM'S IAS, where we take up the important articles from the newspaper and you know what we do with them, right? So let's start today's discussion by discussing the important articles from the newspaper. So the first article which appears in the newspaper is on our screens, which reads, satellites launched by SSLV is in wrong orbit and not usable. So this is the news coming in from the ISRO's latest launch of the SSLV or Small Satellite Launch Vehicle, which was carrying a set of satellites, and it has derailed from its trajectory, and the orbit it was supposed to land into, it has landed in a different orbit. So therefore this news becomes important in the aspect of a significant event that has happened. So what is the news article talking about? It's talking about failure of the mission that the SSLV launch vehicle took place for, but from the examination point of view, what becomes important for us to know is the aspects of the mission as to what is SSLV, what were the different satellites that this launch vehicle was carrying. So we'll take a look at that. So now what has happened in the crash is that this SSLV launch vehicle, which was launched from India, it derailed from its orbit and it was to land in a circular orbit around the Earth, but ended up landing in a elliptical orbit. So this has happened due to a communication failure, thereby communication could not happen with the launch vehicle once it reached to a certain level, which is why this satellite vehicle now, the SSLV, has launched into a different orbit, and now ISRO is saying that it cannot even bring it back. It has turned out, it has become non-usable. So that has been the news related to SSLV. So what is SSLV? SSLV, or the Small Satellite Launch Vehicle. So up until now we have had the PSLV. This is known as the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle. This is also known as the workhorse of ISRO, which means that majority of the satellites since the 1990s have been launched via the PSLV, including the Mars Orbiter mission, the Chandrayaan missions, and many other missions like this. Then the other important launch vehicle is the GSLV, or the Geosynchronous Launch Vehicle. This became the major vehicle for launch vehicle for ISRO when it came to sending larger payloads to larger distances. So this became the go-to vehicle. So now the human mission, which is going the human space flight, which is also known as the Gaganyaan mission, that is going to happen via the GSLV Mark III. This is the version of the GSLV. So that is going to take place via the GSLV Mark III. Now these launch vehicles were there for larger payloads, but there is a booming market for launching smaller satellites into the space, and to launch these smaller satellites, ISRO came up with the Small Satellite Launch Vehicle, which would take up payloads less than 500 kg and launch them into the space. So what are the features of the Small Satellite Launch Vehicle? So it's as we see, it would be a small launch vehicle, and it indicates that 6,000 satellites of 100 to 500 kg class to be launched by 2022. So this Small Satellite Launch Vehicle has a capacity of taking payloads up to 500 kg. So the features are that it is low cost launch vehicle. It's a small launch vehicle, so the cost for manufacturing it is low. Then it is less complex subsystems. The subsystems of the satellite vehicle are less complex, and usage of heritage systems, right, and ease of integration and turnaround time. Now this means that other aspects of the satellites can be integrated in this launch vehicle easily, and the turnaround time for the satellite launch vehicle is less, and it has on-demand launch capability, which means that at the time that one wants to launch the small satellite launch vehicle, the vehicle can be ready. And there is horizontal and vertical assembly features, right? Assembly features would mean that where we can place the payload. So both horizontal and vertical features are there, and minimum launch pad occupancy, that is integration and launch within 24 hours. So minimum launch pad occupancy again would mean that the small size of the launch vehicle would not take up much space, and the launch pad occupancy is very minimum for the satellite launch vehicle. So these are the features which comes with the smaller size of the launch vehicle, and smaller payloads can be transferred. So which were the payloads that were being transferred in the SSLV in this mission? So one was the Earth Observation Satellites, or EOS-2. This was one of the satellite being launched via SSLV. So Earth Observation Satellite 2. Now what are Earth Observation Satellites? As the name suggests, they would be used for Earth observation. So they would use some kind of technology to observe Earth. What is that technology? That is known as remote sensing technology. So these satellites use remote sensing technology to observe Earth. Now by observing Earth, what would we mean? So observing the various information such as physical information, taking images of the physical features of the Earth, chemical features, which means that taking up information, observing the Earth via the chemical aspects, and biological systems as well. So this means that various aspects of Earth would be observed using this technology, and they would come under the Earth observation satellites. So there are various class of Earth observation satellite, like this is EOS-1, this is 2, there is 1, 3, 4. There are many other Earth observation satellites which are used for different purposes, right? And they are generally employed on sun's synchronous orbit, or orbit that is synchronous with the sun. And other Earth observation satellites launched by ISRO include ResourceSat 2 and 2A, CartoSat 1, 2, 2A. So these satellites which are named as ResourceSat or CartoSat, these are again, as I said, for different purposes. So CartoSat is a mapping satellite which would prepare maps of the Earth and other areas which the ISRO wants. So this is for mapping. ResourceSat would map the resources of the Earth, especially based on India. So then we have ReSat and 1 and 2, and then we have OceanSat. This would be observing the ocean, and this is ReSat is, if I am remembering correctly, it is known as radar imaging satellite, which means that it makes use of radar imaging technology. And then we have Megatropics, which would mean Meg is known as cloud, so this would be for cloud observation. And then we have SARAL and SCATSat and INSAT. So basically these are various satellites again used for different purposes, but the main theme is of Earth observation. They would be observing different aspects of the Earth. So the one satellite which was carried by the SSLV was the EOS-2, or the Earth Observation 2 satellite, which was being launched, but since the mission has become a failure right now, the other version of the satellite will be launched soon by the ISRO. Then another payload which the SSLV was carrying was the AZADI-SAT payload, or the AZADI-SAT satellite. Now what is this? This AZADI-SAT set of satellites comprises of 75 payloads, which means that this one satellite itself has 75 different subcomponents. These payloads have been built by 750 young girl students from 75 rural government schools of India. So that has been the speciality of this satellite system, which the payloads of which are the young girls of rural areas have helped in manufacturing these payloads. And it is the result of ISRO pushing for girls to go for the science, technology, engineering and mathematics, or what we call the STEM field. So it has been a step to push for that direction. So if you come across any question which pertains to STEM field, one can cite this as an example, that the ISRO took up this initiative to incorporate the participation of girls in this initiative. So what is it? It is an 8 kilogram cube satellite, which would mean that it would be in a shape of a cube comprising of 8 kilograms, and each of the 75 payloads are weighing about 50 grams. That would totally make the 8 kg satellite, and it will conduct femto experiments, right? So there are certain components in these Azadi satellite which would be launched, and which would do it perform its various functions. So even this satellite was there for the launch, and since the failure has been there, it would be launched again in some other mission now. So these were the information with respect to what is the small satellite launch mission, or launch vehicle, and what were the different satellite that were or the payloads that were carried by this SSLV. So I hope this is clear. With this, let's move on to our next article for the day. Now the next article which appears in the newspaper reads, the workings of the Supreme Court Collegium. Now this Supreme Court and its collegium system, we keep hearing about it in the news and our textbooks as to the collegium system works for the appointment of judges to the Supreme Court as well as the High Court. And recently the Supreme Court Collegium has given out its names for appointing various High Court judges. The collegium has been working under the leadership of CJI N.V. Ramanna to voice out the opinion for filling the vacancy of judges in the Supreme Court as well as High Court. So in the discussion with or the spotlight on collegium has been there quite a lot. That is why the article on understanding the mechanism of collegium as to how it works, what exactly is the system of collegium. So this will become important for us from the point of view of GS2, where we study the aspects of polity and judiciary in particular. So what is this collegium system? So basically this is nothing but a group. When we say that there is a collegium system, in simple words we can call this a group of senior most judges which comprises of the Chief Justice and other judges of the Supreme Court who come together and decide as to who should be appointed as a judge for the High Court as well as the Supreme Court. That in short is the function of the collegium system. So we'll trace in our further discussion as to how this system came to take place, what is the current status of this system, what are the different benefits or challenges pertaining to this system, is there any other alternative that is being suggested, and what is the status with that. So we'll take a look at that as well. So let's start with it. Now when we talk about the collegium system, or for that matter appointment of judges, how should the appointment of judges be? We talk about the Indian judiciary being that it should be independent, right? We often talk that in a democracy the judiciary should be independent. But what do we mean by independent judiciary? A judiciary that is independent would mean that it is able to function independently. And one very important aspect of independence would be the independence to appoint its own judges, and the prerogative or the authority to appoint its judges would lie with the Supreme Court judges only, or the judiciary itself. That one factor will become a very I think I wrote the spelling wrong, right? That one factor would be the deciding factor for the independence of judiciary. So therefore appointment of judges is a big pillar for ensuring the independence of judiciary. So in that aspect, how should be the method of appointing the judges of the Supreme Court and High Court became a matter of big concern between judiciary and the executive, and therefore a lot of development took place before the current system came in place. This started via cases going into the Supreme Court, which are collectively known as the 4 judges case. So there is a case known as first judges case, second judges case, or third judges case. These are basically those cases in which the law or how should be the system of appointment of the judges in High Court and Supreme Court started taking shape. So this system of appointment and transfer of judges has evolved through the judgments of Supreme Court and not by an act of Parliament or by a provision of Constitution. So what are these cases? As I said, these are the judges cases. So first judge case happened in 1981, wherein the Supreme Court declared that the primacy of the Chief Justice of India's recommendation on the judicial appointments and transfer can be refused for cogent reasons. So which means that the primacy of the CJI's opinion could be refused by the government. So this came out to be an attack on the independence of judiciary. So the ruling gave the executive primacy over the judiciary in judicial appointments for the next 12 years. So which means that now talking about who appoints the judge. So the deciding is done by the judiciary, but the formal appointment is done by the president. So under Article 124 of the Indian Constitution, the president appoints the judges of the Supreme Court, right? So the authority which is appointing the judge is functioning as the head of the executive, that is the president. So the president appoints, but who should be appointed? The suggestions for them is the wordings that are there is that it should be done in consultation with the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice. So the interpretation of this word consultation was what came in the case of first judge's case, wherein how should this consultation be? Is this consultation a compulsory consultation that the Chief Justice should be consulted, and the names that the Supreme Court CGI suggests, is it binding that those names only should be taken into consideration? This is what the first judge's case ruled, that the names that the CGI suggests can be refused for cogent reasons. That is why the executive gained primacy. Then the second judge's case happened in 1993, 12 years after that, wherein the SC or the Supreme Court introduced this system known as collegium system, where in order to assert the importance of the Supreme Court and the CGI back in the process of appointment, it devised a system known as the collegium system, wherein it said that okay, up until now the CGI was to decide on who should be appointed. Now what we'll do is, apart from the CGI, we'll also take up some other judges from the Supreme Court and make a group of sorts. This group was named as the collegium system, where now a group of judges from the Supreme Court will decide on their names. This would be holding that consultation really meant concurrence, which essentially means that when we say that the appointment should be done in consultation with the Supreme Court judges, it would mean that this consultation is compulsory and the decision that these judges are giving should be abided by, which would mean that this consultation word that is given should be interpreted as concurrence, which means that their acceptance on the names should be mandatory. So it also added that it was not the CGI's individual opinion, but an institutional opinion formed in consultation with the two senior most judges in the Supreme Court. So the second judge's case ruled that apart from choosing the judges only by one CGI, let's make a group. So a collegium system was made in which would comprise of the CGI as well as two senior most judges of the court. So now that a group has been made of three senior most judges which would decide on the names, and what other ruling was done, that the participation of these Supreme Court judges is a mandatory one, and the suggestions that they are giving has to be abided by. So this consultation should be taken as concurrence. And then the third judge's case happened in 1998, where the group size of this collegium system was increased from 3 to 5, which would mean that apart from the CGI, there would be 4 other senior most judges that would form this collegium system, and then they would decide on as to who should be appointed as the High Court judge and the Supreme Court judge. So this became the scheme of developments as to how the collegium system developed and who all could decide on the matter. So this is the current situation now, wherein the Supreme Court, in order for the appointment of the judges, has instituted a 5-judge collegium system which decides who should be appointed as the judge. Then they give their name to the law minister, and then the law minister takes up the suggestions of the judges, forwards it to the prime minister, and on the advice of the prime minister, then the president would appoint these people as the judges of the High Court and senior Supreme Court judges. While doing so, if the High Court judge is to be appointed, or a judge from the High Court is elevated to the Supreme Court, certain other judges also need to be consulted. Let's say that if a judge is to be appointed from the High Court of Madhya Pradesh, so if there is any judge in the Supreme Court who belong to that court, that judge would also be consulted and talked with before the appointment. So all of this elaborate system is now made under the collegium system. So who heads this system? It is obviously headed by the CGI and comprises of 4 other senior most judges. And judges of the higher judiciary are appointed only through the collegium system, and the government has a role only after the names have been decided by the collegium system. So as I said, the process is the collegium system decides on the name, forwards it to the law minister, he forwards it to the prime minister, on the advice of whom the president will appoint the judges. So the procedures for various judges, let's see, the president appoints the CGI and other SC judges, and as far as the CGI is concerned, the outgoing CGI recommends his successor. So this has been the news in the past week, where the current CGI N.V. Ramanna has given the name of his successor as the next CGI, who is supposed to be Justice UU Lalit. So Justice Lalit will be the next CJI for 3 months and his term will end on November 2022. And in practice, it has been strictly by the seniority ever since the supersession controversy of 1970s. So it has been a practice that has been developed that the senior most judge of the Supreme Court will become the Chief Justice of India. And what happened in 1970 during the time of the Prime Ministership of Indira Gandhi, certain judges who were senior were superseded and a junior judge from among them was appointed as a CJI. So this happened, and after that it has been made a strict provision that the senior most judge of the Supreme Court should become the Chief Justice. And for other judges, for the other Supreme Court judges, what will the collegium do? It will decide on the name. The proposal is initiated by the CJI. It consults the rest of the collegium members as well as the senior most judge of the court, hailing from the High Court of which the recommended person belongs. This was what we were talking about, that to appoint the judge, if any person is to be elevated from the particular High Court. Now, if there is any existing judge in the Supreme Court belonging to the same High Court, that judge will also be consulted to. And these consultees must record their opinions in writing and should form part of the file, which would mean that this collegium, whoever it is consulting, be the resident judge or other judges, whatever their opinion is, should go in writing into this file. And then this collegium sends the recommendation to the law minister, who forwards it to the Prime Minister to advise the President, and then President will appoint the judge. And for Chief Justices of High Court, so what is the procedure related to this? In this as well, the collegium comes into practice, but since it is a state High Court, the role of governor will come in and the consultation with the state government will also happen. So the Chief Justice of High Court is appointed as per the policy of having Chief Justices from outside the respective states. So generally the Chief Justices of High Court are kept from outside that state, and the collegium takes the call on the elevation. And the High Court judges are recommended by a collegium comprised the CJI and 2 senior most judges. And the proposal, however, is initiated by the outgoing Chief Justice of the High Court. So in the case of the Supreme Court judge appointment, the CJI initiated the proposal, but in this case, the Chief Justice of that particular High Court will initiate the proposal. And the recommendations is sent to the Chief Minister, right, who advises the governor to send the proposal to the Union Law Minister. Since it's the state machinery, it would be first sent to the Chief Minister, who would send it to the governor, and then the process will go on to the union level, wherein the Law Minister will give it to the Prime Minister for the President to appoint the High Court judges as well. So this is the system which is there for the collegium system of appointment of various judges. I hope the working is clear about the collegium system and the various level of appointment. Right? So, we had to discuss some of the challenges of the collegium system as well. So, with respect to now the collegium system which is there in place, there are various debates on the collegium system that is happening. These debates are about the efficacy of collegium system. Is the collegium system for appointing the judges really effective? It at one level, it grants some sort of independence to the judiciary to appoint its own judges. But at the same time, it also creates space for only 4 to 5 people of the senior most judiciary to decide on all the names of the High Courts and Supreme Court. This makes room for a lot of favoritism and nepotism in the appointment of judges. So therefore, there are certain challenges in the collegium system as well, wherein it is said that there is a lot of opaqueness and lack of transparency as to who should be the judge. There is what this collegium is deciding on. There is a lot of opaqueness. That is why the rules are being made, where any consultation that is made, that should be going writing in the file. Then there is scope of nepotism. Then embroilment in public controversies. Whenever such appointments are made, public controversies are done, and it overlooks several talented junior judges and advocates. So whenever senior most judges are to be elevated, the junior judges who are talented, they are overlooked, and these are certain critical interventions that need to be done in order to cure the challenges that exist with the collegium system. And what has there been any alternative suggested? So in order to deal with this collegium system and the evils of this, the union government also instituted or tried to institute a specific body known as the National Judicial Appointments Commission, which would mean that this would be a commission which would have members both from the government as well as from the judiciary, and they would decide on the appointment of the judges of the Supreme Court and High Court. But when this case went to the Supreme Court struck down this National Judicial Appointment Commission, which was instituted through the 99th Amendment Act. So the government brought out an amendment in the constitution to inculcate NJAC, and the Supreme Court struck it down in the court in 2015 on the ground that it posed a threat to the independence of judiciary, that the executive was taking a part in the judiciary. That is why it struck down this amendment. So this is the development with regards to the appointment of judges and the working of collegium system. So with this, let's move on to the next article. The next article which appears in the newspaper reads, Center mum on availability or requirement of key leprosy drug. Now, this is an important news because, as we know, the diseases are repeatedly focused by UPSC in its prelims examination. So this article discusses about the news of availability issues of a key drug in the case of leprosy disease. So for the examination point of view, it becomes important for us from the examination from the GS3 syllabus, where we have science related aspects and general science, which we study for the prelims aspect. So let's look at the important pointers with respect to the leprosy disease. What exactly is leprosy disease? It is a chronic progressive bacterial infection. So first important point is that it is a disease caused by a bacteria known as Mycobacterium leprae, and it primarily affects the nerves of the extremities, that is the skin, the lining of the nose and the upper respiratory tract. Leprosy is also known as the Hansen's disease. So this is a bacterial infection disease which mainly affects the skin, the nose and the upper respiratory tract. What does it do? What are the symptoms? It produces skin ulcers, also nerve damage and muscle weakness. If it isn't treated, it can cause severe disfigurement and significant disability. It is one of the oldest diseases in recorded history. And why is leprosy important for India? Because India is home to close to 60% of the world's total leprosy diseases. So the prevalence of India with respect to leprosy as a disease is quite high. It reports that leprosy is endemic in several Indian states and union territories with annual case detection ratio of 4.56 per 10,000 population, and India reports more than 1,25,000 new patients of leprosy every year. So the burden of leprosy on India is quite high. As I said, 60% of the total cases of leprosy are recorded in India itself. So that is why the fighting of leprosy becomes important. So what is the news right now? So there are 3 drugs which are important and are there in the MBT, or the multibacterial treatment for leprosy. The MBT treatment of leprosy consists of 3 important drugs. Now these drugs are which are said as the clofazimine is the drug which is not available to various private hospitals of the country. Let's write it down. This is the drug which is one of the 3 important drugs which are important to cure leprosy. The other 2 drugs are, one is famicine, if I am not wrong, right, fampicine and dapsone. Do we need to remember these names? Clofazimine can be an important name to remember, and dapsone. These are the 3 important drugs which are needed to be given together as a treatment for the multibacterial treatment therapy to treat leprosy. Now out of these 3 drugs, if one drug becomes unavailable, the whole treatment process can go haywire, and the unavailability of clofazimine in various private hospitals has become a cause for worry. And that is what the article is talking about, that many private hospitals are facing the shortages of this drug of clofazimine, and which is a important drug. Now, with respect to the government initiatives about leprosy, as to what is the government doing when India is so prevalent with respect to the disease of leprosy. So, Indian government instituted the National Leprosy Eradication Program in order to make it a mission to eradicate leprosy. So, it is again a centrally sponsored scheme. What did we study about centrally sponsored scheme? That these schemes are those schemes in which the partial funding comes from the center and other half would come from the state. So, it is under the umbrella of National Health Mission, and India has achieved the elimination of leprosy as a public health problem that is defined as less than 1 case per 10,000 populations at the national level. This has been the claim, but certain data that we keep receiving keeps suggesting otherwise, and this aims at eliminating leprosy in each of the districts by 2030. This has been the mission for National Leprosy Eradication Program, and under the same program, the 3 drugs that we just saw, which are a part of the therapy treatment for leprosy, is given to the leprosy patients free of cost for 12 months at a stretch, so that they keep receiving the treatments. So, this was the information related to leprosy and what the Indian government is doing with respect to the leprosy eradication in India. So, right, with this, let's move on to our next article. The next article which appears in the newspaper reads, States holding up results of Economic Census, says Center. Now, with this we get one more census. One is our normal census. Then we have the socio-economic caste census, which we discussed in our several sessions, previous sessions, as to this pertains to collecting information about the caste and socio-economic status of the population. And now we see one more census, that is the eco-census or economic census. Now, what is this census? So, the point of focus for this article would be the economic census, which as the article is saying that the states are not releasing the data of the economic census. So, this would become important for us from the point of view of GS3 and can be used in other aspects as well. So, what is the National Economic Census? As the name suggests, economic census would have the survey of measuring the parameters of the economic parameters of the population, as to what is the employment status, the earning status. So, in 1976, the government of India launched a planning scheme called the Economic Census and Surveys. So, it is the census of the Indian economy through counting all the entrepreneurial units in the country, which would mean that how many entrepreneurial startups are working, companies are working in the country, which involved in any economic activities of either agriculture or non-agricultural sector, which are engaged in production and or distribution of goods and services, not for the sole purposes of own consumption. So, this would mean that all the firms that are working in either the agriculture sector or non-agriculture sector, they would come and they would be surveyed under the census. So, how will they be surveyed? Various information with respect to these firms will be taken in. So, it would provide detailed information on the operational and other characteristics, such as the number of establishment. By conducting this survey, we'll get to know how many such firms are there, the number of persons that are employed. So, we'll get the crucial employment data from these firms, source of finance, how are these units being financed, and the type of ownership. So, a comprehensive information with respect to the economic system of India can be gathered via this economic census and surveys. So, this information is then used for micro level decentralized planning and to assess contribution of various sectors of the economy in the GDP. Whenever such data is collected, its usage can be multifaceted. We can use this data to formulate policies, local policies. The data that is collected, let's say that the data gets collected and we get to know that a certain state or a certain region in the country has more industries, but the other states show different data. Now, this data can be used to formulate policies to that effect and can be locally sourced as well, can be locally applied. So, that is the importance of collecting data from the economic census. Now, is this the first census that is being done? No. As we saw in 1976 itself, it was launched. So, up until now, total 6 economic censuses have been conducted. And in 1977, the CSO, or the Central Statistical Office, as it was named earlier, conducted the first economic census in collaboration with the Directorate of Economics and Statistics in the states. And the second economic census was carried out in 1980, followed by the third in 1990. And the fourth took place in 1998, while the fifth was held in 2005. And the sixth edition of economic census was conducted in the year 2013. And after that, the seventh economic census data, which was collected in 2019, is yet to be taken out by the states. So this is done under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, this particular economic census. And it is collected, the data is collected by various states, and this is what the article is saying, that the states are not putting out the data of the economic census, which they should very quickly, so that the data that is being collected for the past 2 years can be easily viewed and can be accessed, so that the policies over them can be formulated faster. Because if the data is delayed and not released quickly, the efficacy and use of that data might also go in vain, and it would lose its relevance. So that becomes the important point points with respect to the economic census. With this, let's move on to our next article. Now the next article becomes a repeat article for us, which reads Tapping Technology to Check Minor Mineral Plunder. Now this article is written by a Rajya Sabha MP who talks about the issue of illegal sand mining and its impact. So we've covered the same issue of our 20th July session. So in order to access the same issue, you can tune into this analysis of 20th July, where you'll find the issue of illegal sand mining, which is talked about in the article, discussed in great detail, and you should also read this article to add points with respect to the discussion, right? So with this, we finish our quota of today's articles, and we'll meet again tomorrow to discuss the important articles from the day. Thank you.